The urinary system is basically a waste removal system. It's made up of two parts. The upper urinary system includes the kidneys, renal pelvis, and ureters. Kidneys essentially filter your blood of excess fluid and impurities. That's what becomes urine. You may be able to live without a lot of things, but your kidneys aren't one of them. The ureters are tubes that carry the urine downwards from the kidneys to the bladder. There's a sort of valve along the way that prevents urine from backing up to the kidneys. The kidneys don't want it and could be seriously damaged if the urine were to make its way back. That's the upper system. The lower urinary system includes the bladder, its muscles, the urethra, and the sphincter muscle. The bladder both stores and empties urine. Its walls are made up of several interwoven muscle layers. These muscles are relaxed when your bladder is filling, but flex and contract when you empty your bladder. The bladder walls have receptors that keep track of how full it's getting. At about 200 millilitres, the receptors start signalling the brain that something will have to be done soon. At 400 millilitres, the signals are pretty much non-stop. We've really got to go. The female adult urethra is somewhere between 3 and 5 centimetres long. It's the tube between the bladder and the exit. Right below the bladder, just here, where the urethra starts, is a sphincter muscle. It's a kind of gatekeeper. The muscle squeezes the urethra shut as the bladder fills, and then relaxes when it's time to empty. That's part of why you can or can't hold your water, so to speak. The other is the difference in pressure between the urethra and the bladder. When the pressure level is high in the urethra and low in the bladder, it's easier to hold back. When you're emptying your bladder, the reverse happens. Pressure goes up in the bladder and lowers in the urethra. And that's the urinary system in a nutshell. But the head, for the most part, is still in charge. In a very complicated interaction, your bladder sends signals that it's filling up along the spinal cord to one part of the brain. That part then signals to another part of the brain, which you feel is a need to pee. When everything's working properly, you can then decide when to empty your bladder. Once you give the signal, your central nervous system sends the commands that contract the bladder and cause the sphincter muscle to relax, lowering pressure in the urethra as it opens. When your bladder is completely empty, everything goes back to the way it was. Which brings us to the big question: why isn't the system working properly? Well, it may be a temporary or a lifelong malfunction. It depends on your condition. For some who see IC, the problem is an overactive bladder, which is a muscle, remember, contracting involuntarily. It means you could have the urge to pee 15 times a day, but never actually empty the bladder completely any of those times. Or the bladder muscle itself is too weak to ever empty totally. Officially, this can be a type of incontinence because the contractions can also result in a sudden unstoppable emptying. The same thing can happen to women who, as a result of their injury or condition, can't feel their bladder fill or its signals for emptying. The other reason the urinary system might not be working properly is retention. Some or all parts of the urinary system aren't working properly, so it simply can't go through the automatic steps for emptying the bladder completely. It could be due to damage to the urethra or the inability to relax the sphincter. It could also be that the bladder muscle is weakened due to injury or the result of a medical treatment. With retention, you might be able to pee but don't empty completely, leading to an overfull bladder. Some women experience both incontinence and retention, especially if they have a nervous system condition such as MS, spina bifida, or a spinal cord injury. The problem from a medical perspective is that there will be residual urine in the bladder, which could lead to infections and leakage. And if the bladder never empties properly, it could get too full and back up into the kidneys, which is a very serious problem. Women with spinal cord injuries or spina bifida also experience more or less severe versions of these symptoms because of damage to the nervous system. But whether you have a milder or more severe form of incontinence or retention, the good news is CIC can definitely be a part of your solution, and a really easy and effective one at that.